Good afternoon from the garden. In today's video I want to show you a polyculture of annual vegetables that can be sown around midsummer. Last year we filmed a series of videos about a polyculture that I designed to be sown at the beginning of the growing season in our climate, that means in the first half of April. But I also wanted to try a different mix that could be sown later in the year. It's the 22nd of June, which means yesterday was summer solstice, the longest day of the year, and now even though it's sad to think that way, the days will be getting shorter again. And there are some vegetables that are day length sensitive and that actually prefer to be sown after the longest day. So these can be included in this year's polyculture and could not be sown or could not be really successfully grown if you sow them at the beginning of the season. This bed where I want to sow my polyculture was amended with our homemade compost at the beginning of the season, and I covered it with straw to prevent weed growth. So all I have to do now is rake the straw to the side and I will have beautiful crumbly soil to sow into. In my polyculture I'll be sowing vegetables from different plant families and many different varieties, and because I'll be broadcasting the seed and there's such a variety, it is very important to start with weed-free soil or soil where there are not many weed seeds as well, because weeding can become quite challenging when you have so many different plants growing together. It's also very important to start harvesting early, so that if you sow the vegetables too densely, with their patches that are too dense, then you harvest the seedlings, and that means that the rest of the plants will have enough room to develop properly. Therein lies the main problem with the polyculture sown in midsummer for us, because we'll be going on summer holiday over several weeks, over 4 weeks I think, and that's kind of the critical stage when it's important to start harvesting the first seedlings. So this is an experiment, we'll see how it goes. The first group of plants that I'm going to sow are different varieties of lettuce, and I'm opting up for things like different varieties of romaine lettuce, since these are less prone to bolting. Butterheads, for example, are not really suited to sowing at this time of year. Still, if the weather is very hot, it can mean that the lettuce will bolt prematurely, but we'll see. Also a reminder that the polyculture is a good way to use up seeds that with uncertain germination rate. For example, this, but Maravilla de Verano. This lettuce variety I've had for a couple of years, so I'm not sure how well it will germinate, but I also have some fresh seeds that I bought this year, so there should definitely be something that will grow. Apart from Maravilla de Verano, I also have Clermont, Pablo Picasso and Rubens. And I'm going to put all these seeds in this little bowl. I'm going to mix them and then broadcast them over the bed. I'm going to try to sow the seeds as evenly as possible, but it won't be perfect, but that's also not a real problem. I can correct it later by harvesting from the patches that were sown too densely. The second group are different varieties of chicory, radichio and other kinds of chicory plants. And even though I included them in my spring sown polyculture, they're actually also better sown a little later in the year. I have a mix of different varieties and then a variety called Catalonia fastigliata. And again, I'm trying to mix it well and then sow it evenly as possible. Then I have different varieties of Oriental radishes, which also are preferably sown later in the year after the longest day. Unlike the spring radishes, they will also get quite a lot larger. And including these is also one of the reasons that I'm not including any mustard greens, because when they start germinating, the leaves are quite similar and it would be difficult to recognize, to make the distinction which are radishes that should be left in the ground and which are the mustard greens that you should be harvesting. Also, mustard greens sown at this time of year would be really prone to bolting. But it's a great time for sowing the radishes. I have different varieties. This one is called Radichio, which is one of my favorite. It's quite similar to, in taste, it's the most similar one to the spring radishes. Then there's Sakurajima, Japanese giant radish, and green meat, which is a really pretty variety that is light green from inside. I want to sow less of these because they need to get larger than the greens, which can be harvested at a very early stage. So I'm trying to sow these, to broadcast these evenly, but more further apart than, for example, the lettuce. Okay, I feel like I'm doing a good job. Next group are different varieties of kale, which can also be sown now and possibly harvested at seedling stage or at any stage pretty much, so I'll see when I want to harvest them. I think in this case it's really nice that you can get a mix of seeds instead of having to buy different varieties, which you might not use up. So, and it's also a possibility with lettuce or mustard greens if you're sowing the spring polyculture. I don't think I'm even going to sow all of them. Okay. Next up is Fennel, Florence Fennel. It also seems that the variety is called Fennel. I'm only sowing one variety because I don't think there's that much difference in taste. And again, a fennel is very prone to bolting if you sow it too early. So this is a good time. Yeah, I'm going to sow all of it. And also, if there are too many fennel plants, that I can harvest them as seedlings before they form a substantial bulb. The next one is a celery variety called Red Venture, which has red tinted stalks, and it's grown as more as a herb, so for the leaves. Oh, the seed is very fine, so it might be, this is the reason why you should not mix all the different kinds of vegetables together, because seeds like this would fly further away, the heavier seeds would fall closer by, and it would be very difficult to get an even distribution. So it's better to sow all the varieties separately, or the kinds of vegetables, not all the varieties. We'll see whether this whether we'll find it in the polyculture at all. Next, chervil, which is a great hardy herb, can be sown very late in the season as well. So I might be able to harvest from it, I don't know, maybe even throughout the winter. We'll see. And herbs like this are also great companion plants usually, so it's good to include some herbs in your polyculture if you can. Next one, quite an unusual herb or vegetable, Japanese chrysanthemum, which in Japan is grown as a vegetable for its leaves. The flowers, yellow white flowers, are edible too, but they are slightly bitter. It's not everyone's taste, but again, I'm convinced that it's good for the diversity in the polyculture as well. And the last thing I want to sow is amaranth, kale, leaf vegetable with red-winged leaves. And the seed is also, I don't know how old it is. It doesn't say on the packet, but doesn't matter. We're sowing lots of things, so if one of them does not come up, it's not a problem. And at least I'm using it up now. Also very fine seed, so not so easy to sow, but I'm doing my best. We just had a perfectly timed rain shower, which watered the planting, the seeds that I sowed. And the last thing remaining is to cover the seeds with a layer of preferably some material that is free of weed seeds. What I'm using here is spent potting mix from my containers at home, in which I made myself, and it contains a lot of our homemade warm compost, and also some sand. So it's I sifted it. Normally I don't bother sifting compost, but because some of these seeds are quite tiny, it's good to do a thin layer of sifted material. So the seeds are covered, and within a few days the first one should start germinating, and we're going to film a couple of follow-up videos like we did last year. I hope it's going to be a success, but there might be some issues, mainly due to potential lack of care if we're not here at some crucial periods. And I hope that at least it inspires you to experiment with your own mixes, with your own polycultures. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to follow along. Happy gardening!